today we are back in West Africa. So today this is going to be our last part of the three-part African Empire series, and I'm super excited for this video, which is going to be about the Empire of Songhai. Now I decided to save this one for last because I think it's the most interesting out of the three empires, and it had a very complex ruling system and governance system that we are going to talk about in just a minute. So please subscribe. You don't have to hit the like button though. So let's just look at the immense territory for a second that the Songhai Empire controlled at its peak. It was the largest out of these three African empires, and it got even bigger than the Mali Empire, which was super big anyhow. Now, we talked about the Songhai Empire a bit in the Golden Empire of Mali video, but we didn't talk about it enough, since in today's video, we're going to talk about it even more. So, the Songhai Empire was a very big, very expansive empire. It was, again, as I said, the biggest of the three African empires. But like all empires, Songhai started small. And where it started was the banks of the Niger River, where many other civilizations like Mali had started. The Niger River was almost like what the Yellow River or the Hudson River were like for things like New Amsterdam or China, or even Mesopotamia's Tigris-Euphrates river system. It was the lifeblood of the region. If we take a look at what Songhai used to look like, it was just a tiny state on the banks of the Niger River. And no one knew at the time that this tiny country would end up becoming the strongest of the three African empires, big African empires at the time. And it's time to see how Songhai went from this tiny state here on the banks of the Niger River to a ginormous empire stretching from Dakar to Chad. Sorry about that, guys. My dog is barking. Doggy, please, would you stop here? Would you stop? I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to take away your squeaky toy. There. Okay, sorry, guys, about that little interruption. I am back and ready to jump into more Songhai Empire learning. So the Songhai Empire got their first really big buff at the end of another empire. So the Songhai Empire used to actually completely be a part of the bigger Mali Empire. The Mali Empire we already talked about. You know, it had some very famous rulers, Mansa Musa and Sundiata. But the Mali Empire by this point was basically ripping apart at the seams. Its big city, Timbuktu, was being plundered by Berber invasions to the north. In the south, bandits and other migratory groups were plummeting southern cities. Even from the west, the Portuguese and Spanish destroyed many forts and destroyed coastal defenses on the western coasts. And because of all this, plus internal conflict, the Mali Empire just ceased to exist, essentially. And after a long and successful reign as an empire, Mali ceased to exist. Timbuktu, despite being the largest city of the empire, was not the capital. In fact, the capital of the empire was Niani, which was way down here. The problem with having Niani as your capital, however, was that it was so far away from the main population centers of the upper Niger and the Sahel belt. And because of this, the Mali Empire always has a very troubled time governing its empire. The Songhai Empire didn't have that problem, and that's what we're going to talk about in a second. In the late 15th, actually maybe the 1400s, in the mid 1400s, the Songhai didn't rule anything but a tiny county, essentially, on the banks of the Niger River. The governor, if you will, of this county was a man by the name of Sunni Ali. And Sunni Ali had an idea in his head. What if he conquered this empire called Mali and just literally stole the idea of the gold trade? And that's exactly what he was about to do. So he literally declared independence from Mali and, sorry about that guys, literally started a civil war in the empire. Eventually he won and the Songhai Empire was officially born. He was able to center his power base on the east of the Niger River, and he conquered the eastern parts of the Mali Empire. Now, the Mali Empire isn't looking so spectacular anymore, isn't it? The capital of the Songhai Empire was Gao, and since they controlled a much smaller landmass and were very organized to begin with, they slowly started to pick up parts of the Mali Empire and slowly went on multiple conquests and raids of Malian land, which they slowly integrated into their nation. The Songhai Empire didn't just expand west into Mali, though. It also expanded east down the Benue River into modern-day Nigeria. In addition to this, the Songhai Empire had great leadership, unlike the crumbling Mali Empire did at the time. The Songhai Empire was a strong state ruled with an iron fist by Muhammad. He becomes important later, don't worry. By Sunni Ali. Sorry about that, guys. The Songhai Empire expanded under the rule of Sunni Ali. An important thing to note about the Songhai Empire was instead of using the term Mansa like Mali did, they used the term king. So it was King Sunni Ali instead of Mansa Sunni Ali. Just an important distinction there to make. Eventually, the Songhai plundered the city of Timbuktu and literally burned it to the ground. But there's some context that needs to be added. Before the Songhai conquered Timbuktu, there was an important period of kind of anarchy in the city. It's kind of odd, but the Berbers, the northern tribes that had been bothering the Mali Empire for so long, eventually in the late 1400s surrounded Timbuktu and plundered it. They literally carved out a kingdom in the northern fringes of the Mali Empire and destroyed the city of Timbuktu. Why does this friggin' marker cap fall off so much? Whatever. I'm gonna hold this thing right down on my table from now on. Okay. So, anyways, these Berbers didn't last for long, however, because religious leaders in the city called for the Songhai king and Sunni Ali to come into Timbuktu to give them their independence and restore the rule of the Mali Empire. But Sunni Ali was really the medieval century equivalent of a bad boy, because instead of listening to their requests, he straight up betrayed them and just took the city for himself, starting an even brutaler reign for the people of Timbuktu than they had before. This was really the final nail in the coffin for the Mali Empire, and eventually even lost its coastal territories to the Jollof tribe. Eventually, by the very early 1500s, the Mali Empire basically only existed in name, with it just being a legendary state of West African medieval history that had just recently been thrown away for us to all forget about. But Songhai, on the other hand, was about to carve out its own empire, reconquering almost all of the lands and even more lands than the Mali Empire did, reconquering the fallen Mali kingdom, and even sacking Niani multiple times. This was now the new power in the region, and it was all thanks to our good friend Sunni Ali. Speaking of him, let's go show. Oh, he's dead. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. Now, as you may know from the Golden Empire of Mali video, having your king die is like a serious no-no, because that means your kingdom could literally fall apart. And that was what was going to happen to Songhai as well. It would be so sad. An empire literally just forming and then literally just getting destroyed in the inside again. But luckily, one man by the name of Askia Muhammad saved the whole country. See, after Sunni Ali died, his son was supposed to take over, but he was a weak leader. So basically, seconds after he was coronated, Sunni Ali led a coup backed by the people and became the king instead. Not Sunni Ali, Askia Muhammad. Why do I keep confusing those two so much? Askia Muhammad was a very, very talented ruler. He split the empire up into provinces, and this was meant to provide better jurisdiction to the empire. And because of this new system of governance, the Songhai Empire prospered. So it really just went up and up and up and up from there. But like Mali and like Zimbabwe, all empires fall. In 1596, in the late 1500s, especially around 1596, some very bad stuff started to happen to the Songhai Empire. First of all, the first thing that happened that would start the long downfall of the Songhai Empire would be Askia Muhammad, literally the man who started a coup against the government, having a coup thrown back at him. His son staged a coup against his government and took control of the empire. And he banished Askia to a marshy, mosquito-filled island in the literal middle of nowhere. Now that is just brutal and is a pro-gamer move. So what happens next, you may ask? Well, even more ironically, the son who led a coup against his father was deposed in a third coup by his brother, who after a year returned Askia Muhammad back to Songhai. But partially because of living on a mosquito-ridden swampy island for a year, Askia died a year later, and his son took control again, and this time this son was even weaker than the previous son. So the Songhai Empire just fell, boom, just like that. Because in 1596, Moroccan raiders destroyed the entire country, ending the 200-year reign of Songhai. The Songhai Empire had many great innovations, and one thing that we didn't get to talk about much in this episode of African empires was the way it balanced the salt trade in the north with the gold trade in the south. And it actually, in some ways, did this better than the Empire of Mali. Next episode, before we end, I would like to inform you that this channel is now going to go by an upload schedule, a video every week, and a history And after the next videos, there will be a history schedule too. What I mean by that, so the next videos will be a 3-part mini-series about the history of the Mongol Empire. This will be the first time when videos on my channel are uploaded after they were, not directly after they were created. And because of this, like, they will all 3 of these episodes will be uploaded on the same time. This upload schedule will start after I'm done with this series about the Mongol Empire's expansion. And in addition to that, I'm also planning to, after the Mongol Empire's expansion, make a continental cycle for every continent except with the exception of Antarctica, of course. So I'll go in order between all the continents. So first week will be Europe, then we'll go to South America, then Asia, then North America, then Africa, and we'll finish off every 6 weeks with an Australia episode. And those are usually going to be pretty short because there's not as much Australian history as there is European, African, or American, or Asian history. So I just want to wrap that up. This is Matt Man signing off.